Okay, so this is going to be a soft body tutorial actually using just cloth simulations that actually work better for this use case. And I urge anybody to just watch this video because you might learn something about simulations and cloth especially. And I think it's kind of important because I see a lot of people who are in the architecture visualization space, for example, and they're very, very good at lighting, rendering, and camera composition. But when it comes to other tools which are inside a Blender, like sculpting or simulations, they just never touch it because there's very rarely any need. But I do think there is a need because I keep seeing the same regurgitated walkthroughs in architectural spaces, especially where it's just walking through a scene, like walking through a bedroom or bathroom or garden. And that's it. It's just walking through the scene and just with some nice music. And I've done this as myself all the time. But I just feel like there's some really good use cases for simulations in these kind of spaces, such as something floating on the water, or let's say you're walking through a bedroom and there's a teddy bear on the shelf, and just as the camera walks through, the teddy bear just falls on the ground and just does a boop, boop, boop. It would just look very cute and it would just add a little bit of life to this animation, which would not have previously been in there. And I feel like that would just interest the viewer so much more and definitely be worth doing. So I'd recommend anyone just to watch this tutorial and try to learn something about cloth simulations. And maybe in the end, you can try something out yourself as well. Now, why didn't I use soft body? And the reason why I kept finding it to be so much slower for this particular use case and so much more janky in the amount of times the simulation just completely blew up and disappeared. And I just thought, you know what, I'm just gonna do it in cloth. I'm just gonna set it to be springs, and it basically acts the same as a soft body simulation. Now there's certain things which it can't do, such as plasticity and things like that, but for this particular use case especially, it worked perfectly. So I'll be using cloth simulations in this case, and then later I can do a soft body tutorial if you guys want to. So let's jump into the tutorial and see how it goes. But I actually first need to let you guys know that iMesh is now full access for only $17 a month. So if you've been thinking about it, but you've been putting it off and you didn't know how to trial iMesh for a smaller price, then now's the time because you get absolutely unlimited access for only $17. So if you're even thinking about architecture visualization or something like that, then get iMesh. We also have a new add-on so you can download directly inside of Blender. It's amazing. It's so much faster. Workflows are speeding up considerably because of it. And there's no better time to get into architectural visualization. Okay, so this is Blender. I'm using 4.3.2. You can use 4.4, and I believe other versions should be fine as well. This is nothing new. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the iMesh Asset Manager, and I'll recommend downloading this. I'll put the link in the description of where to find this. I'll make this product, which we'll be using, free, and then you can follow along. So if I type in Flamingo, and then we'll get these options. We should see one called free. I'm just going to click download that and then append that into the scene. And we get something like this. Now this is quite a high poly object. And if I want to do any simulations on something like this, it will get quite slow and sluggish. So the trick with doing simulations is to make a second low poly version, which the high poly version will then follow. And it should save a lot of time. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove these modifiers because I can add them in afterwards if I need to. And then I am going to join these handles to the main part, and then I'm going to separate these pieces here. Right then, so we have a nice object that's ready to go. So I'm just going to do some renaming to make this a little bit easier. Flamingo main, and then I'm going to call this one Flamingo wing 1, and then this one Flamingo wing 2. So we now need to make a low poly version. And now to make a low poly version, I'm going to be using this add-on, Quad Remesher. Now this is a paid add-on, but there is a free trial. So if you go to the website exoside.com, you should be able to download a free trial for a whole month, and you should be able to then follow along to this tutorial. So if you go to Quad Remesher videos tutorials, you can then find out how to install this and then get it going. Once it's installed, you'll have a panel like this, and then we can get some remeshing going. So I'm going to turn this off because there are some sharp edges in this object which we don't really need. And then I'm just going to leave it at 5000 and click remesh. Okay, now if I go into edit mode, we can check over this object. We can see that it actually looks pretty good. And I think it's ready for some simulation, but I do need to just remove these from this object. And now I'm going to call this one, I'm going to make a new collection. I'm going to call this one Remesh and then I'm going to drop this one into here. I'm going to call this one Flamingo Main Cloth. And then I'm going to do the same for this one. Now, this was 5,000 polygons. That's the target that it aims for. It's not always going to hit that, but that's the target. Now, that's for this whole big object. Now, this smaller one here won't need as many polygons. So I'm just going to reduce this to about 2,000 for now and click Remesh. And we can see that it's a little bit janky on these sides. I don't know how the simulation is going to handle some geometry like this. So I might need to clean up the original object. So I'm just going to duplicate this. And then I'm just going to hide the original. And now we have this object. I'm just going to remove this bevel because I think that's complicating the remesh. So just go into edit mode, hold down Alt and Shift, and just click on these edges. And it should go all the way around. Okay, it looks like it's missed a couple, so let's just select these ones as well. I think that's probably good. So let's X dissolve edges, and there's one over here, X dissolve edges. Right then, so that's pretty good. Now let's do the same for this one. Let's duplicate this, hide the original, and then let's reduce the polygons for this one. So this one, this one, this one. And again, it looks like it's missed a couple, so let's just grab these. And then click X dissolve edges. There we go. So now we have some meshes which are ready to be remeshed. So let's try this one again and click remesh. There we go. So this looks a lot better. It's a lot smoother, and yeah, everything looks good. So I'm going to call this one Flamingo Wing 1 Cloth. And then I can then remove the edited version. And then for this one, I'm going to do the same again. Let's remesh that. And that one also looks good. And I'm going to again call this one Flamingo 2 Cloth. And then I can remove the edited version as well here. So now we have a low poly object, and we also have a high poly one on top. So now we need to do some animation. So let's actually grab everything here. Let's just rename this to make it a little bit smaller, because we are renaming things and we're editing this quite a lot. So managing it myself makes it a bit easier. And if you wanted to, you can right click here and just give them different colors if you'd like. Right then, so let's grab all the objects and bring them up a little bit, because they are going to fall to the ground. And then I'm going to add a mesh and then add a plane. And then for this object, I'm going to go to the physics tab and I'm going to add collision. And now we need to do some simulations. So with this object, originally when I was doing my tests, I was using a soft body, because you'd imagine this is it's acting like a soft body object. But actually I found it was easier to make a cloth object. So if I click cloth and then click play, we can see this object falls to the ground, it hits, and it completely deflates and disappears. So there are a few settings which I want to change on here. So by default, these are all working fine. I'm just going to go down to internal springs and then enable that. I'm just going to change this. I was playing around with this and I found 40 kind of worked. And then if I click play, we can then see it basically holds its whole shape. Now, if I then change this to say something like 5 and then change that again and press play, we can see that it is a lot softer. But I don't know if you noticed this, but you can see that this object collides with itself and it goes basically inside itself. So we do need to enable some self collisions here. Right then, now with self collisions enabled, I'm just going to reduce this to 0.005 and then we can just click play. And now we can see that this is no longer colliding with itself. It's not going to get through that object. Now, if you do find that sometimes the whole object, when you enable self-collision, it sometimes interacts with itself in places which you really don't want it to. So sometimes in these crevices, if this crevice is 0.005 closer to this part, it might start interacting with itself and cause some problems. So I found it's sometimes easier to actually set vertex groups. So if I select these faces here, just face select, C, and then I can just brush all this whole area. I can then add that to a self-collision group, assign that, and then I can go back to the physics tab, and then I can then say self-collision, just this self object. Now, nothing would change, and now you'll see that it actually goes through itself, because strangely, self-collision is saying, actually, this is the part which I want it to go through itself. I thought that feels a bit backwards. I don't want it to collide with itself. So what I'm actually going to do is go here, do remove that, Control I, and then assign that. So if I click select, it's everything except the part which I don't want it to go through itself. So now if I go back, I do sometimes find that actually is a little bit faster as well. This part won't go through itself, and you're not going to have any problems where you don't want it to be interacting with itself. So now we have this object, and that's looking pretty good. Now it's time to do these ones as well. So I'm just going to click these two, click this one, Control L, and I'm going to click copy modifiers. And then I'm going to go back to here, and now I can just adjust these how I want it to. But for these ones, to speed things up, I am going to disable self-collision, because I don't think these are going to have any problems. And same for this one, just disable self-collision. Now if I click play, we can see that everything starts falling, but nothing's really interacting with itself. Now if you didn't want that to happen, for example, let's just put these here. Actually, one thing I've just forgotten, let's just select everything, right click, set origins to center of mass, and you can do also Control A and apply the scale just in case. If I click on this one and do collision, and then scroll right down, or just turn this off, and we'll get something like this. Now if I click play, we can see that this now interacts with it and it throws it off. And I found that this was overcomplicating it, and because there were so many moving parts, I decided to just turn off collision. And what I'm going to do later is I'm actually going to pin this object to this flamingo in such a way that you can't actually see it interacting with itself. And in my final render, you can't actually see this. So I'm just going to leave this off for here. Okay, so now I'm going to try to make sure that these objects do actually follow the main body. So if I was to do this one and then do Control P like this and press play, we can see that it still goes through itself, because according to Blender, the origin points haven't changed, because when you do a simulation, the origin point stays the same, but the vertices actually move. So parenting will not work. But what you can do, you might think, if you know this, you can hold down Shift, click on this one, and then do Edit Mode. You can select 3 vertices like this, already had them done, and then do Control P, and then you have parented this origin point to these vertices. So if I press play now, we can still see that it goes through itself. And that's because this object is also being simulated, and according to Blender, the origin point still hasn't moved. So we need to make a hook. So let's do Alt P, let's clear that parent, and then what I'm going to do is just hide that, click roughly in the center where the wing is touching, do Shift A, I'm going to add an empty. Let's just reduce the size here. I'm then going to click on this object, holding down Shift, then do Edit Mode, and again, let's just do roughly a triangle. You can do 1, 2, or 3, but by doing 3, it kind of follows, you can kind of triangulate the face direction. So let's do Control P. Now this empty is parented to this one, and this one will now work. So if I do play, you can see that this is now following the whole object, and you can see it rotating based on this face direction. So let's do another one here. Let's actually call this one Hook 1. And then for this one, I'm just going to hide that, do Shift A, empty, add an empty, and reduce the size. I'm going to hold down Shift, click on this one, go into Edit Mode, just deselect what we already had, and then make another triangle like this, and then do Control P. So now we have 2 empties that are following the surface object. I'm then going to go back, and now I can bring back these cloth objects. And now we want to create a hook. So I'm going to click on this one, and I'm going to go to the front view. I'm going to go to Edit Mode. Let's bring everything back with Alt H. And then I'm just going to press C. I'm going to press Shift. I'm just going to deselect what I don't want. You can just press Shift and click if you don't have anything selected. And then I'm just going to roughly deselect the bits which are not touching. It doesn't need to be accurate. And then I'm just going to click Add a Vertex Group and call that one Hook 1. Oops. And assign that. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this one. Roughly the bits which are touching. I'm going to call that one Hook 2 and assign that. So we called that one Hook 1. We're going to call this one Hook 2. And now we're going to create a hook. So I'm going to go to the Modifiers tab. I'm going to add a hook. And then I'm going to choose Hook 1 as the object and Hook 1 as the vertex group. Now if I click play, we can still see that it goes a little bit weird. It's kind of going through itself. It doesn't really make any sense. I can try bringing this object up to here. And that still goes through itself. It's less janky though, but we're missing one last thing. Let's go to the Physics tab and go down to the Shape. I'm going to add a shape, a pin group. I'm going to pin this hook. So that's basically saying that this vertex group is not going to move and the simulation should work around that vertex group. However, we have actually told Blender to move that vertex group specifically. So now if I click play, we can see that this is now attached to that surface. So let's go back. Let's do the same thing for this one. Let's add a hook. Let's bring this one to the top. I'm going to do hook 2 and hook 2 for the vertex group. Go to the physics tab and go to pin group, hook 2. So now if I press play, we can see it all interacting perfectly. Right, but now what I want to do is I need to tell Blender that the high poly object should follow the low poly object. So let's unhide these. I'm going to click the flamingo main, go to modifiers and add a surface deform. And then what I can do is select the flamingo main cloth and click bind. Now, sometimes you might get this error to say that you have a concave polygon. And that's basically like if you have a polygon like this. I believe this is a concave polygon anyway, because there's kind of like a floating edge. There's no actual edge here, so Blender doesn't really know what to do with this surface. However, if I was to join these two together with J, now Blender knows exactly how these faces are going because they are triangulated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the main cloth. I'm going to add a triangulate modifier. Then I can go back to the main and then I can click bind. And now that works. So let's try the same for this one. Wing 1. Surface deform, and then I'm going to select wing 1 cloth, click bind. That one actually worked, so that's great. Let's do a wing 2, add a surface deform. I'm going to do wing 2 and click bind, and that one worked as well. Kind of a nice use case when sometimes something doesn't work, so I can show you how to actually fix it. But there we go. So now if I was to hide this low poly object and click play, we can see the high poly object is now following that simulation. We can see that it's looking really good. Now then, if you find that the simulation maybe looks a little bit too low quality, or you're seeing too much of the low poly object, in the original, when you do actually originally remesh it, you can add more polygons, or you could add another subdivision modifier at the bottom of this cloth, and that will smooth out a lot of these edges. It will be slower, but it will then smooth out these edges. But I think this looks pretty good, to be honest. So I'm happy with that. Now, you may be wondering from the original video, how did I make the water waves? So let's just do a really quick example. I'm just going to click this object. I'm going to go to modifiers. I'm going to add dynamic paint. Click on this button here. I'm going to add a brush and add brush. Now I'm going to click Shift C, add a mesh, a plane. I'm going to subdivide that a bunch of times. And then I'm going to also add a dynamic paint. I'm going to add a canvas, and I'm going to set surface type to waves. Now if I press play, you can see that it's had some ripples. So let's actually drag this up a little bit so it actually goes through. You can see, oh, let's shade smooth. We can see some waves. So it was basically that easy. For the actual waves, there was already waves built into it. Let's quickly go over that. Let's just go to the object tab. Let's do a new object, and I'm just going to add a noise texture, and then I'm going to add a displacement. Let's just put the factor into the height, this one into displacement. And then what I'm going to do is go to the material tab, and then what I'm going to do is go to settings and displacement only. So if I go to render preview now, we can see some crazy displacement, and let's just reduce this like this. And then I could just change the scale. What I did then was go to 4D, and then you could just change the W, which is basically the seed. And as you bring this across, you can see that the waves are kind of going like that. So that's basically how the waves were done. And that tied in with the original waves like this. You can see that they also interact with each other. So bring this down a little bit. We can still see that the waves are kind of going across. So that's basically how that animation was done. If you want to know more about that original animation and how other parts were done, please let me know. This is basically an overview of how I did the fabric simulation part, because I think it's good to know. I really, really do think that when people are doing architecture visualization especially, they forget about all the other things that Blender can do, and I think it just adds so much more to your renders if you can do something like this.